afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Erev Shabbos. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? Come on, Facebook, do your thing. Yehudit in South Carolina. Renee, wishing everyone good Shabbos. Guy in Ohio. Marjorie in Georgia. Ilanit in Silver Spring. Sharon in New Jersey. So, my Hebrew birthday is tonight, Shabbos. But I won't be speaking to you during my birthday, right? Because it's Shabbos. And by the time I get back on tomorrow night, it won't be Shabbos anymore. So I will take, with God's help, this opportunity to bless you, my holy sisters and brothers. You should be blessed to grow in wisdom every day of your life. May you be blessed to spread light everywhere you go, to share the light of Torah with those around you. May you be blessed to grow in wisdom by learning from every person. May you find joy by being content with your portion. May you find honor by honoring others. And may you be strengthened by acquiring the strength to overcome your impulses. That's a bracha for all of us. And may we all be learning together to 120. And we say Amen. Let's do some learning. Our daf today is page 112 here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud, working our way through chapter 9. Today continuing our discussion of Mishnah 11. Mishnah 11 here in chapter 9. So we learned in the Mishnah yesterday that the employer, right, violates several negative prohibitions and fails to fulfill the positive commandment when he doesn't pay his workers in a timely manner. And we continue that discussion. So the Mishnah teaches when does he transgress these prohibitions, right? The prohibitions: do not delay, do not fail to pay, do not hold his money overnight, etc. So at what point does the employer technically become, can we say that he is in violation of these negative commandments when he withholds the payment? When exactly does he become guilty of this transgression? When does he transgress these prohibitions? He transgresses them when the one who is owed the money claimed the payment from him. So very interesting. That's why I said the title of today's show, Squeaky Wheel Gets the Grease. The employee has to claim the payment, right? So he does the work and he says, I have finished the work. Pay me, right? We've got a plumber working in the house right now. When he completes the work, like all plumbers do, he will say, I have fixed the pipe, I have fixed the leak, this is what I did, and this is what it costs, and that's when you have to pay him, when he claims the payment. If he did not claim his payment from the employer, then the employer does not transgress the prohibitions. And the sages taught, with regard to the verse, the wages of a hired laborer shall not remain with you all night until the morning, Leviticus 19:13. One might have thought that he should be liable even if the laborer did not claim his wages from him. The verse states, with you, meaning, meaning that the prohibition is not transgressed unless it is with your knowledge and consent that you have not paid him. You have to know that the job is done, the money is due, and if you're not aware of that, you're not violating this transgression. But if the worker did not even request his wages yet, the prohibition has not been violated. Furthermore, one might have thought that the employer is liable even if he does not have the money to pay him. Therefore, the verse states, with you. indicating that there is money with you. One might have thought that even if the employer transferred his payment to a storekeeper or to a money changer, he still violates the prohibition of delaying payment of wages. Therefore, the verse states, with you, indicating that it applies only if the payment is your obligation, but not if he transferred it to a storekeeper or to a money changer, as then the payment of the laborer's wages is no longer his responsibility. Now, I wonder, are people having the same experience? I'm just monitoring the feed on Facebook, and it keeps saying the feed has ended when it hasn't, and then I just have to press reload, and then there I am still talking. So if you think that the feed has ended prematurely, just reload. I don't know why Facebook does that. Where am I? I read that, right? So so the Mishnah teaches, if the one who owes the money transferred his payment by leaving instructions with a storekeeper or with a money changer to pay him, he does not transgress the prohibitions. This is like a payment company, right? They're using the storekeeper or the money changer as a payment entity, right? So these days, obviously, we have all kinds of companies that handle payment between employers and employees, between contractors and employees. There's all kinds of payment solutions, right? But back then, that was a payment solution. So the Mishnah teaches, if the one who owes the money transferred his payment by leaving instructions with a storekeeper or with a money changer to pay him, so then the actual employer doesn't transgress the prohibitions because the employee needs to go seek the money from the storekeeper. So a dilemma was raised before the sages. If the storekeeper or the money changer neglected to pay the wages, may the laborer return to the employer and claim his money from him, or may he not return, as the storekeeper or money changer is now his exclusive address for complaints. And Rav Sheshes says he may not return, and Rabbah says he may return, and the law follows Rabbah. If the agent of the employer fails to pay the employees, then the employees do have recourse to the employer. It's not their fault that the employer's agent failed. Rabbah said, from where do I state my opinion? From the fact that the Mishnah teaches he does not transgress the prohibition, from which it may be inferred he does not transgress the prohibition, but the laborer may still return to him to collect his wages. And Rav Sheshes said, what is the meaning of the ruling that he does not transgress the prohibition? It means that he is not included in the category of transgressing, as his transfer of payment exempts him from all responsibility. But we follow Rabbah. The sages inquired of Rav Sheshes, if the laborer worked as a contractor who is paid for a completed job rather than by the hour, does the employer violate the prohibition of delaying payment of wages, or does he not violate the prohibition of delaying payment of wages, right? So it's a little bit different, right? The contractor says, I will do this job. Then whether it takes him 2 hours or 10 hours or 30 hours is the contractor's problem. What he said is he would deliver the job, a completed job. As opposed to somebody who gets hired, to work by the hour until the work is completed. So this one who just is offering to deliver a completed job, is his payment subject to the same kind of prohibitions on withholding wages as the hired laborer? That's what we're asking. So the resolution to this inquiry, very interesting, depends on how a craftsman's wages are classified. Does a craftsman, who is a type of contractor, acquire ownership rights through enhancement of the vessel? This would mean that the craftsman is considered to have acquired the vessel through his work, which enhances its value, and it remains in his possession until he returns it to the owners, who are then considered to have purchased the enhanced item from him. It's very interesting. It's like if you take a broken watch, right, to the watchmaker. Right? He's a craftsman. So what's the broken watch worth? Not so much. You give it to him. Now he's going to work on it. Do we say that now he has acquired it because it has come into his possession? It is now legally considered property of the watchmaker. And when he puts his work into it and enhances it and now creates a working watch, so do we then say that the original owner is purchasing that watch for the price of the enhancement, right? Obviously, he's not purchasing the entire purchase price of a watch, but he has to offer what it costs to take it from a broken watch to a working watch. And it's that money which then acquires the watch back from the watchmaker. Or do we say that the watchmaker never acquired the watch? It was just placed into his custody so that he could work on it. And then what he's being paid for is the wages of his time that he spent fixing it. Right? Those are the two views. So does a craftsman, who's a type of contractor, acquire ownership rights through enhancement of the vessel? This would mean that the craftsman is considered to have acquired the vessel through his work, which enhances its value, and it remains in his possession until he returns it to the owners, who are then considered to have purchased the enhanced item from him. And accordingly, the money that the craftsman receives is akin to a loan in that it will not be subject to the prohibition of delaying the payment of wages. It's not considered a wage, it's more like a purchase. Or does a craftsman not acquire ownership rights through enhancement of the vessel? And the obligation of the owner to pay him is similar to the obligation to pay wages to any laborer, in which case the money is classified as a wage, and it would be subject to this prohibition on delaying wages, right? Bottom line, is it a payment or is it wages? If it's wages and there's a delay, the one who owes the wages, it will be subject to liability for this prohibition in the Torah. But if it's a payment, I mean, there's still contractual requirements and the guy has to pay for the watch. But in terms of the timeliness, it's not moderated by the laws on delay of wages that are included in the Torah. So Rav Sheshes said to them that he does not violate the prohibition, meaning that the wages are not wages. It's a payment. They asked Rav Sheshes, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that a contractor does not violate the prohibition? And Rav Sheshes replied, there it is referring to a case where he transferred the wages to a storekeeper or to Rav Sheshes said to them, he does violate the prohibition, right? Meaning they are wages. And they said to Rav Sheshes, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that a contractor does not violate the prohibition? And Rav Sheshes said there it was referring to a case where they transferred the wages to a storekeeper or to a money changer. Because of that intermediary, we don't apply the same kind of law as when the employer is paying directly, but the craftsman's pay is considered wages and is subject to the prohibition on delay. So the Gemara suggests, let us say that the following Baraisa supports the opinion of Rav Sheshes with regard to one who gave his garment to a craftsman, and the craftsman concluded the work and notified the owner that the work was complete. Even if the owner delays paying the craftsman from now until 10 days henceforth, he does not violate the prohibition of delaying the payment of wages. If the craftsman gave the garment to him at midday, then once the sun has set and the owner has not paid him, the owner does violate the prohibition of delaying the payment of wages. So what's the difference? They gave the garment to the craftsman. Okay. So what happened is the craftsman finished the work. In the first case, he just told the owner, I finished the work. Right? He said, I finished the work, but he's still holding the garment. That's why we don't kick in the delay of payment prohibition. But if the craftsman finishes the work and says to the owner, here's your garment back. Now, if the owner doesn't pay in a timely manner, the prohibitions on delay of wages do kick in. So the Gemara concludes, and if it enters your mind to say that a craftsman acquires ownership rights through the enhancement of the vessel, why does the owner violate the prohibition of delaying the payment of wages? It is as if the craftsman acquired the garment and the payment is considered to be a purchase of the garment by the owner rather than a wage. And then it wouldn't be that the delay wouldn't kick in. The prohibition on delay wouldn't kick in. Since we do say that the prohibition on delay kicks in, it must be that these are wages and not a purchase payment. Rab Mari, the son of Rav Kahana, said that's no proof, as the Baraisa is stating the law, the halacha, with regard to the laundering of a thick garment, where there is no enhancement of the garment. Therefore, the craftsman does not acquire it. And the Gemara asks, well, ultimately, to what end did the owner of the garment give it to the craftsman? He gave it to him in order to soften it. Once he has softened it, that is an enhancement, and the craftsman has therefore acquired it. The Gemara responds, no, it is necessary to teach this law in a case where the owner hired the craftsman for treading, i.e. to forcefully tread on the garment in water until it softens, with the owner paying the craftsman a ma coin for each tread. Accordingly, this is considered hired labor, where the craftsman is paid based on the amount of times he performed an action, and not a contractual labor where he is paid based on the outcome. In this case, a softened garment and the prohibition of delaying payment of wages does not apply to this case. In this case of a softened garment, the prohibition of delaying payment of wages doesn't apply. In this case of the softened garment, the prohibition on delaying wages does apply. Okay. Now we're on page 112b. The Mishnah teaches, if a hired laborer requests payment at the proper time, all right? We said if he doesn't request payment at the proper time, then the employer is not going to be guilty of violating the prohibition. He still has to pay, but he won't be guilty of that prohibition. But if the laborer claims his wages in a timely fashion and the employer delays, so then he has these additional penalties, right, that he wouldn't have otherwise. So if a hired laborer requests payment at the proper time and the employer claims that he already paid him, so now we have a he said versus he said, right? He says, you hired me, I completed the labor, now pay me. And the employer says, thank you for completing the labor. I already paid you. One of them is telling the truth and one of them is not. The one who is not telling the truth might be lying or he might be mistaken, but he's not telling the truth. So in this situation, if a hired laborer requests payment at the proper time and the employer claims that he already paid him, the laborer takes an oath that he did not receive his wages and then receives the wages from the employer. Now that's a little bit surprising. Who is seeking to extract payment? The employee, right? He says he hasn't been paid yet. Now normally where you have this kind of a dispute, as in, for example, you say, Sal, I lent you $100. I say, you did lend me $100, but I already paid you $50, right? So according to me, I only owe you $50. You're seeking to get that from me, but I say, yeah, but you're right. You're seeking to get it from me, so I take the oath, right? In that case of a partial admission, you would say, Sal, you owe me $100. I say, I do owe you $100, but I already paid you $50. Then I take an oath that is the truth, that I paid $50 and I only owe $50, and then that's all you're going to get, right? So the burden of proof would be on you to get something out of me, more than what I'm willing to give. You're not able to prove it. I take an oath, and then we're done. I mean, I'll pay you the $50 that I still owe you, but I'm not going to have to pay more than that because I swore the oath. Here, the employee is seeking to get money from the employer. The employer says, I already paid you. So normally we would expect that the employer takes an oath and then he's dismissed. Right? Then he is, not dismissed, but he doesn't have to pay. He's absolved. But the sages reversed who takes the oath in the case of the employee and the employer. The employer says, I already paid you. The employee says, no, you didn't. I have not received money. And so then the court will, as long as the employee is willing to swear an oath that he has not been paid, then that's enough, right? The employer is not able to prove that he already paid. The employee is not able to prove that he hasn't been paid. But if the employee is willing to take the oath, then the employer will have to pay him. So why was the burden of swearing the oath shifted from the one who's holding the money to the one who's seeking to get it? Because of the imbalance in power between the employer and the employee, as we shall see. So if a hired laborer requests payment at the proper time and the employer claims that he already paid him, the laborer takes an oath that he did not receive the wages, and then he gets the wages from the employer. And the Gemara asks, why did the sages institute for a hired laborer, who is the plaintiff, to take an oath and receive his wages, in opposition to the principle that in the case of a monetary dispute between two parties, it is the defendant who takes an oath that he is not liable, and he thereby exempts himself from payment. That's what I was looking for, exempt. So Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says they taught great halachas here. They taught great laws here. And the Gemara is puzzled by this choice of words. Are these halachas? These are ordinances designed for the proper running of business transactions, not halachas that apply to everyone at all times. So the Gemara amends the statement. Rather, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says they taught great ordinances here. Okay, so what are the great ordinances, right? And the Gemara is still unsatisfied with this terminology. Does the word great indicate by inference that there are minor ordinances? Which ordinances are considered of minor importance? Aren't all ordinances of the sages considered important? So why are you labeling these as great ordinances? So rather, Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says they taught fixed ordinances here that are necessary for practical life. And the reason is that taking the oath is actually the duty of the employer. But the sages transferred the oath of the employer and imposed it upon the hired laborer due to the livelihood of the hired laborer. The laborer, the worker, requires his wages to survive. And therefore, if the employer is allowed to exempt himself by taking an oath, the worker will be left with nothing. So the Gemara asks, and due to the livelihood of the hired worker, should we cause the employer to lose out? I mean, if we have a principle of evidence and establishing a matter when the one seeking to get the money from somebody, he has to prove his case. And if he can't prove his case, it's already, like a benefit to the plaintiff that we would make the defendant swear an oath. But if he does swear that oath, and that's by Torah law, then he's exempt from payment. So why are we going to change this principle just because the worker has less power and needs the livelihood? I mean, we understand, we feel sorry for him. That's important. But, the Torah also says that in litigation before a judge, you shall neither favor the rich nor the poor, right? You have to apply justice in a just manner. So why are we making this shift? That's the question being asked. And the Gemara answers, it is preferable for the employer himself that the hired worker should take an oath and receive his wages so that other workers will hire themselves out to him with the knowledge that their wages are secure. Right? So it's not just that we feel sorry for the workers who live hand to mouth and they really need this money so they can eat. Obviously, that's very important and our compassion should be aroused. But it also makes the system work, right? If you've got a system, where the big fat cats exploit the workers, then if the workers have any choice at all, they'll go work for someone else, or they'll go work in another locale, right? Everybody benefits from having a just system. So it is preferable for the employer himself. And the Gemara asks, well, but you could argue the reverse, that it is preferable for the hired worker himself, that the employer should take an oath and be exempt, so that he should hire these workers. If he's going to feel like he's being exploited, that the actual owner of the factory is going to feel that these laws are exploiting him, well, then he'll find some other jurisdiction to build the factory in. And then these guys won't have any jobs at all, right? So the system has to work for all concerned. You can't just say that you have to favor the workers so that there will be workers willing to work. That's not a sufficient explanation. And the Gemara answers, the employer must find workers to hire. And the Gemara answers, yeah, well, the hired workers, they must find employers to hire them. So now the Gemara retracts its previous explanation. Rather, the reason that we shift the burden, or really the opportunity, to swear an oath and then get paid, right? We shifted from the employer swearing an oath and being exempt from payment to the worker swearing an oath and getting paid. Why do we do that? Because the employer is preoccupied with many workers. And it is more likely that he forgot and mistakenly believed that he already paid this particular worker's wages, as opposed to the worker who knows very well whether he got paid or not. And the Gemara asks, if so, if it is reasonable that the employer forgot, so then we should give this laborer his wages without even making him take an oath, as there are grounds to presume that the employer made a mistake. And the Gemara responds, the worker takes an oath in order to alleviate the concerns of the employer, as if the worker is not required to take an oath, the employer will feel that he has been cheated. So we give the worker the opportunity, but we're careful in how we give him that opportunity. And the Gemara asks, but why not have the worker instead give him his wages in the presence of witnesses every time, which would remove all uncertainty? And the Gemara answers, the matter would be an inconvenience to both of them if they needed to find witnesses before every payment. And the Gemara asks, but why not have the employer give him the wages at the outset, before he starts working, when he is less preoccupied? And the Gemara answers, both of them want the payment to be in the form of credit, i.e. that the wages not be paid in advance. The employer prefers this arrangement in case he has no ready cash at his disposal, while the worker also prefers to be paid at the end of the day so that he does not lose his money in the meantime. And the Gemara asks, if so, that even if the dispute between them concerns a fixed amount of payment as well, the laborer should take an oath. Why did we learn in a Baraisa that if the craftsman says, you fixed 2 coins for me as the payment, and the other, the employer, says, no, I said I would pay you 1 coin, and then the burden of proof rests on the claimant. Why is it not assumed that the employer was preoccupied and forgot because he has lots of workers, as in the previous case? And the Gemara answers, the fixing of wages, the amount to be paid, this is certainly an event that people remember. And there is no concern that the employer forgot how much he stipulated. That's interesting, right? That psychologically speaking, the employer is more likely to forget whether he paid the worker or not than how much he agreed to pay. That is interesting. And the Gemara says, okay, well, if so, if the concern exists that the employer might have forgotten, then even if his time had passed for claiming his wages, the laborer should be entitled to take an oath and claim his wages. Why do we say that the worker has to make his claim in a timely manner? What difference does that make? Why did we learn in the Mishna that if the time had passed, then he does not take an oath and receive his wages? Right? This idea of taking an oath because neither can prove whether he was paid or not paid, and therefore he has the opportunity to take an oath and then get paid, only works if he makes his claim in a timely manner. Why? And the Gemara answers, the reason in that case is that a presumption exists that an employer does not generally violate the prohibition of delaying payment of wages. And the Gemara says, but didn't you say that the employer is preoccupied with having many laborers and he might forget? And the Gemara answers, this statement applies only before the time of his obligation to pay arrives, as it is possible that his preoccupation with other matters caused him to forget whether he had already paid him. Now we're on page 113a, and I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, please get them in. But when the time of his obligation to pay arrives, then he applies himself and remembers all the details so as not to violate the prohibition of delaying payment of the laborer's wages. And the Gemara asks, why would one rely upon the presumption that the employer would not transgress? But is the hired laborer suspected of violating the prohibition of stealing? Why would we think that we have a presumption of innocence on the employer and we don't have a presumption of innocence on the worker? And the Gemara replies, there, concerning the credibility of an employer, there are two presumptions. Whereas here, concerning the credibility of the worker, there is only one presumption. And the Gemara explains, concerning the credibility of an employer, there are the following two presumptions. One, that the employer does not violate the prohibition of delaying wages, right? That's a big prohibition in the Torah. So we don't assume that any employer violates that. We start with the assumption that he doesn't violate. And then if it's proven to the contrary, we take action. So we assume that he pays on time. And the other assumption is that a hired worker does not delay the request for his wages. But here, concerning the credibility of the worker, there is only one presumption, i.e. that the laborer does not violate the prohibition of stealing. So the Mishnah teaches, if there are witnesses who testify that the worker claimed the money from the employer, he takes an oath and he receives his money. And the Gemara asks, but what need is there for witnesses that he lodged a claim when he is claiming it from him in front of us? And Rav Asi said, the Tana is referring to witnesses that testified that he claimed it from him at its proper time. And the Gemara challenges, even if the worker claimed the money at the proper time, perhaps the employer paid him afterward. And Abaye said the witnesses testify that he claimed it from him the entire time, i.e. from the time he completed his labor until the end of that day, and he wasn't paid, right? So in other words, to get paid under the oath aspect, you're taking a note that you didn't get paid, but you have to bring witnesses that you asked to be paid, and that you did so, that you asked to be paid, and that you did so in a timely manner. And that concludes our... Oh, no, I'm sorry. And the Gemara continues, and is it always assumed that the employer did not pay the laborer? Why does the fact that he claimed his money at the proper time mean that his claim against his employer is always accepted? And Rav Chama Bar Ukva said, the Tana means that he is given another day corresponding to that day of his claim, during which the laborer can claim that he has not been paid. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 11 here in Tractate Bava Metzia. So tomorrow night, when Shabbos ends, and it's very late, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get on as early as possible. We're even doing Havdalah after the class so I can get on earlier. So hopefully by about 9:30, 9:35 tomorrow night, Pacific time, we'll open Mishnah number 12 here in chapter 9. Let me take a couple of questions now. No questions? Let me see. Nope. Looks like no questions. Just double checking, scanning the comments. No questions. Okay, well, I will just share this. Every time we have class, the class ends, I say goodbye, and then this candle is still burning, the wisdom candle, and I put it out. It's been already, I learned this Jewish practice probably like 2 years ago, maybe less, but I didn't know it before. Did you know that when Jews have to put out a candle, we don't blow it out? We don't blow it out. It's, I believe, a Kabbalistic practice, but it is considered inappropriate to blow out a candle perhaps something to do with that the soul of a man is likened in the Bible to the candle of God. And so we don't blow that out, because the breath is also associated with the soul. I have to look up what the reason is, but at any rate, I'm just showing that we don't blow out a candle. So I'll show you how I put out the candle, which is always after I turn off the camera, but it's like this. That's how we put out a candle. We don't blow it out. Lucy says, if the laborer waits too long, does the employer not have to pay? No. It's just, he will always have to pay what he owes. It's just that because he didn't make his claim in a timely fashion, the employer won't be violating the prohibition on delaying wages because the claim for the wages wasn't made in a timely fashion. That's why he's not guilty of the delay. But it's not that he's excused from payment. However, if they then get into a dispute, right, then being able to swear and get paid won't work. But if the worker can, prove that he did the work and that he didn't get paid, then he certainly will be paid, even if he didn't make the claim in a timely manner. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow.